Speaking truth to power. Hey everybody, it's your old pal Jazz McKay, you know, the deplorable patriot, and I thought maybe we should do a video about election integrity and selective prosecution. Now this video is going to run a little longer than the ones I usually do, so get comfortable and take it all in. First of all, here is a compilation video of Democrats denying election results. The questions are, will any of them ever be held accountable? Will any of them be indicted?
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
How can you win with Russian interference, though?
That's a real
what I'm
thing.
scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered.
Russia interfered with our election, attacked our democracy for the sole purpose of artificially placing someone at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They were successful.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president.
The president-elect, although legally elected, is not legitimate.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
You said you believe that Russia's interference altered the outcome of the election.
I do. We have a president who, if in fact it is proven, has been assisted by the Russians and may in fact not be a legitimate president.
The one thing that Trump is fearful of when it comes to his being president is that finally we will see how illegitimate his victory actually was.
I have an objection.
I object to the 15 votes from the state of North Carolina. I object because people are horrified.
He's an illegitimate president.
Our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to hashtag protect our democracy and hashtag follow the facts.
John Lewis is completely right. There is a cloud of illegitimacy around the election of Donald Trump. The Russians interfered with his election. James Comey and the FBI interfered with his election. The fake news industry interfered with his election.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president who got illegitimate foreign help.
Do you believe Trump is a legitimate president?
What I believe is that there's no question that the outcome of this election was affected by the Russian interference.
There absolutely is a cloud of illegitimacy.
So that legitimacy is in question, yes. So that was a very tainted election, and in that sense, it's illegitimate.
Why do you think the president is going to such great lengths to essentially prove that he beat you?
Because he knows he didn't. He knows he's an illegitimate president.
Stolen emails, stolen drone, stolen election. Welcome to the world of unprecedented Trump.
So do you believe President Trump is an illegitimate president?
Based on what I just said, which I can't retract.
He tweeted in February 2018, quote, "The more we learn about the 2016 election, the more illegitimate it becomes. America deserves to know whether we have a fake president in the Oval Office."
The Russian attempt to have the election, and frankly, the FBI is weighing in on the election, I think makes his election illegitimate.
There was a widespread understanding that this election was not on the level. We still don't know what really happened, Isaac. I mean, there's just a lot that I think will be revealed, history will discover, but you don't win by 3 million votes and have all this other shenanigan stuff going on and not come away with an idea like, whoa, something's not right here.
Seems to me that there's a cloud of illegitimacy that continues to hang over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
The outcome of the election was affected by their interference, and now we need to know, to what degree, if any, the Trump campaign was actually in collusion with Russia.
He knows he's an illegitimate president. So of course he's obsessed with me. And
I believe that it's a guilty conscience.
We actually won the last presidential election, folks. They stole the last presidential election.
And Al Gore won that election. I think he won it anyway.
Actually, I think I carried Florida.
Al Gore won the election nationwide and also in Florida, but the Supreme Court ruled the other way.
Al Gore got more votes, but not enough to stay out of the Supreme Court, where President Bush was elected 5-4.
Bush versus Gore. A court took away a presidency.
If all the votes were counted in Florida, that Al Gore would be president today and George Bush would be back in office.
I come from Florida, where you and others participated in what I call the United States coup d'etat.
In 2013, according to reports, Vice President Joe Biden, he claimed that Al Gore was the one who was elected president. And he claimed that the recount result was, quote, a bad decision.
And never forget, dear friends, what they did in Florida to Al Gore and me, to all of us, to older Americans, to African Americans, to Haitian Americans, denied the right to vote and have those votes counted.
I do believe that the projections were right in the first place at 7 o'clock when they called it for Gore.
Let me tell you something. Without a doubt, George Bush did not carry Florida, and it was not close.
There's no question that you won the state of Florida. Oh, thank you, Charles. No, it's a question. That's a question. We will never know because the votes weren't counted. But and did, in your judgment... I mean, that's a fact. Unfortunately. Yeah.
And there is no other way of saying it but be very blunt. Al Gore won the state of Florida in 2000, and we should never forget it.
Most Americans, or a great many Americans, don't have confidence that the election of 2000 was fair.
But I don't believe we lost. I believe we just failed to have all of the votes counted.
The Supreme Court elected the president.
2004, yes.
Al Gore won the state of Florida in 2000, although not the presidency.
We know we won this election. They know we won this election. And Americans know we won this election.
I know some people want you to believe that the Gore campaign was a campaign that wasn't able to complete its mission. We did. Had all of those votes been counted in Florida, I think Al Gore would be president today.
We had more votes. We won, and we are never going to let the United States Supreme Court choose the President of the United States again.
You should know by now, based on the fact that he lost the popular vote by more than 500,000 voters, and we don't know how many he lost in Florida.
There's no doubt in my mind that Al Gore was elected president.
I rise to object to the fraudulent 25 Florida electoral votes.
Really, we won the election in 2000, but they stole the election.
I must object because of the overwhelming evidence of official misconduct, deliberate fraud, and an attempt to suppress voter turnout.
Enron had already helped the Bush team with such favors as ferrying their rent-a-mob to Florida in 2000 to permanently halt the counting of legally cast ballots.
It is signed by myself on behalf of my diverse constituents and the millions of Americans who have been disenfranchised by Florida's inaccurate vote count.
The Supreme Court, not the people of the United States, decided this election.
Speaking to a Democratic group in Chicago Tuesday, he made it clear he thinks Al Gore was the winner.
By the time it was over, our candidate had won the popular vote, and the only way they could win the election was to stop the voting in Florida.
Catherine Harris, Jeb Bush, Jim Baker, and the Supreme Court hadn't tampered with the results, Al Gore would be president.
I think that the issue before us today is not who won or should have won the 2000 presidential election. That issue has been settled, not to my belief, but it has been settled.
Right. Let's just drop the vice. President Gore, that's all right. Al Gore should have been President of the United States.
Al Gore made it possible for George Bush to be the only appointed president in the history of these United States.
Democrats have won the past 3 presidential elections.
In 2000, unions turned out 25% of the vote, and Al Gore won.
But the Supreme Court tampered? That's a large charge. The Supreme Court stopped the counting of the votes, and if they'd let the count go on, Al Gore would have got the necessary votes.
The Supreme Court selected George W. Bush
as the president. He was not elected.
There is overwhelming evidence that George W. Bush did not win this election.
What I observed as a voter, as a citizen of Illinois 4 years ago, were troubling evidence of the fact that not every vote was being counted.
I don't think that George W. Bush won the election in 2000 against Al Gore, because I think he probably lost Florida and also that nationwide.
If you invite me back on this show in about 8 weeks, I think you're going to learn that Al Gore actually did get all the votes there.
I felt what happened in Florida was a carefully worked out conspiracy. That many things could not go wrong in one state without there having been a conspiracy. And many different things did go wrong. Many tricks were pulled of various kinds.
The vice president did win, but and I do believe that the majority of voters that intended to go to polls last year wanted to vote and cast their votes for Al Gore. I do believe that in terms of Florida as well.
The court has been thwarting formation of the popular will, the most spectacular example being Bush versus Gore, where the majority, by a 5-4 vote, enjoined the counting of more than 100,000 ballots in Florida and essentially gave America its first court-appointed president.
Even though Al Gore won the election, he won't take office.
That election was stolen from the rightful winner. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to talk about a stolen presidential election.
I think in 2000, everybody thought, well, he did win the election, Al Gore.
He started dividing America here in Florida by trying to take an election that I think any reasonable person would say he hadn't actually won.
What happened in Florida will go down in history as a coup d'etat.
Could we conclude, or is it possible that there was a conspiracy and Florida officials were involved in the conspiracy? Never have so many things gone so wrong in one place before. How did all these things happen all at the same time in the same state? And is not it possible that there was a conspiracy that was very well organized? Why were the state police out there on that day, election day, checking license plates and so forth? You know, how did all these things happen in one state at one time in one election? Is it possible that we ought to use the word conspiracy and not be afraid of it?
And I sure wish Gore was president right now. He should be.
Well, he actually got elected.
Well, good.
A battle that by the will of the people should have ended in victory. But tens of thousands of Florida votes either were not counted or tossed out in the 2000 presidential election.
5 Supreme Court justices trumped the votes of 51 million Americans. We should have let the entire state be recounted so it was clear that Al Gore actually won the state of Florida.
And Al Gore won the election.
We had the election stolen from us. And you must admit that. They stole it. And we need a leader to help us get revenge.
Y'all voted for Al Gore. He won the election.
They usurped the powers of the Florida Supreme Court and intervened. It was a fix as far as we're concerned. You know, there's no polite way to talk about it except the fix was in.
After the election, when you stole the election, you came back here and said, get over it. No, we're not going to get over it.
You know it, I know it, they know it. We won that election.
Constantly shifting vote tallies in Ohio and malfunctioning electronic machines which may not have paper receipts have led to additional loss of confidence by the public.
The right to vote has been stolen from qualified voters.
The New Yorker reported that Kerry thought that, quote, proxies for Bush had rigged many of the voting machines.
In 2004, the democratic process was thwarted.
The 2004 presidential election in Ohio was riddled with unnecessary problems.
Some machines malfunctioned, causing votes to be counted more than once, or not at all.
Based upon an inordinate number of allegations suggesting gross voting rights violations and misconduct, I join with my colleagues in objecting to counting the state of Ohio's electoral votes.
As in 2000, the votes of many who wanted to vote were not, in fact, counted.
This last Friday night, I arranged to meet Senator Kerry at a fundraiser to give him a copy of my book. He told me he now thinks the election was stolen.
The wife of John Kerry said she has lingering doubts about the legitimacy of the election. Her theory goes like this. Two brothers she calls hard
right Republicans own 80% of voting machines in the U.S. Therefore, it would be easy to hack into the mother machines that control the electronic voting.
There were numerous irregularities in Ohio, including large percentages of rejections of provisional balloting, problems with voting machines.
As we look at our election system, I think it's fair to say that there are many legitimate questions about its accuracy, about its integrity.
There are still legitimate concerns over the integrity of our elections.
The question, obviously, is how many instances were not caught that we don't know about. Number one, we've seen a lot of what I'll call honest glitches where it just didn't work right. But also that these machines are hackable. A dishonest employee of the vendor, or a dishonest employee of a local board of elections, or simply someone who knows electronics and has a computer at home could hack into these machines and put in a secret instruction to disregard every 20th Democratic vote or add 10% to the carry or to the Bush vote or whatever, and you might not ever know it.
I agree with tens of millions of Americans who are very worried that when they cast the ballot on an electronic voting machine, that there is no paper trail to record that vote.
The numerous irregularities that occurred with the electronic voting machines in Ohio on November the 2nd of last year point to an unresolved national crisis.
We cannot declare that the election of November 2nd, 2004 was free and clear and transparent and real. There must be independent testing of the voting machines used in Ohio.
I'm not confident that the election in Ohio was fairly decided. We know that there was substantial voter suppression, and the machines were not reliable.
The members of Congress who have brought this challenge are speaking up for their aggrieved constituents, many of whom may have been disenfranchised in this process.
Treating today's electoral vote count in Congress as a meaningless ritual would be an insult to our democracy unless we registered our own protest against the obviously flawed voting process that took place in so many of our states.
Voters who wish to cast a vote for president or vice president can't approach the polls with certainty that their vote will be counted.
One of the most significant problems in Ohio and in many other states was the lack of measures to ensure the integrity of electronic voting machines.
In 2004, they caused Democratic voters in Ohio to wait for 8 hours before they could cast their ballot. They turned the Department of Civil Rights and the Justice Department into the voter suppression division with voter ID laws, voter purging, voter caging, voter intimidation. There aren't going to be any more election stealings.
And I do have one very affirmative statement to make. We won, but I didn't lose. I got the votes, but we won't know exactly how many because of how they cheated. I did win my election. I just didn't get to have the job. We were robbed of an election.
Without voter suppression, Stacey Abrams would be the governor of Georgia. Andrew Gillum is the governor of Florida.
Using the word rigged, using the word steal, do you think it's dangerous going into 2020?
I don't, because we can actually back it up. And so in response to what I believe was a stolen election, and I'm not saying they stole it from me, they stole it from the voters of Georgia. In fact, someone outside asked me if I'm ever going to concede. The answer is no.
If she'd had a fair election, she already would have won.
This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. And I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
You refused to concede and say that you lost. Do you stand by that decision today?
Absolutely.
If Stacey Abrams doesn't win in Georgia, they stole it. It's clear. It's clear.
Steal your election. It was not a free and fair election. I think the election was stolen from the people of Georgia. I believe it was stolen from the voters.
I think that Stacey Abrams' election is being stolen from her.
The election was not fair. The process was not fair. Thousands of Georgians had their voices stolen because they were not able to cast ballots, and they cannot be guaranteed that their votes will be counted in 2020 if we don't do this right.
If what happens to you happens nationally, and we see whoever wins the Democratic nominee, if they say, actually, I can prove that there's a number of votes in every state and that the same thing that you just described happens in multiple states, should they concede?
I do not think we should concede an election until we know the results of an election. I still fundamentally believed it could be fair. And that's just not how life works. If it looks like it's cheating, it probably is. If it looks like it's rigged, it probably is.
She would be the governor of Georgia today had the governor of Georgia not disenfranchised 1.4 million Georgia voters before the election. That's what happened to Stacey Abrams. They took the votes away.
We've been raised to believe that it is invalid, in fact, it is uncouth to call question. That if you want to run for office again, you got to concede the election so that everyone knows you're a good sport. I'm not.
You notably did not concede.
I did not.
Okay, you acknowledged that he won, but you did not concede.
Correct.
5 months later, do you still feel like your opponent won through voter suppression?
Yes.
Reminder, she wrote, Brian Kemp stole the gubernatorial election from Georgians and Stacey Abrams.
I said that the election was stolen from Georgia voters. The process that took place during the legislative cycle was one that did not countenance and did not pay attention to the deep and real concerns of those who watched this election be stolen in the state of Georgia. It was stolen from the voters of Georgia. Georgia voters did not have their votes counted. They were not allowed to cast votes. They had their votes discarded.
It certainly gave the appearance of unfairness, and I think there was unfairness. Stacey ran a great campaign. She probably won.
And it was not fair to those who filled out absentee ballots, and depending on the county you sent it to, it either was counted or not counted, assuming you received it in time. Brian Kemp oversaw for 8 years the systematic and systemic dismantling of our democracy, and that means there could not be free and fair elections in Georgia. As long as we have eligible American citizens who cannot cast a ballot, then the game is rigged. I am complicit if I say that that system is fair. Concession in the political space is an acknowledgement that the process was fair. And I don't believe that to be so. But I refuse to concede because concession means that the process was proper, that the result was true and right, and I cannot say that. I tend to say I didn't lose, I just didn't win. And I don't call it a loss, I just didn't win. But yes, you did. Okay, officially. Yeah. Officially. Put it this way, I didn't get inaugurated, and that's problematic. Okay. But will I say that this election was not tainted, was not a disinvestment and a disenfranchisement of thousands of voters? I will not say that.
Candidates, both black and white, lost their races because they have been deprived of the votes they otherwise would have gotten. And the clearest example is from next door in Georgia. Stacey Abrams should be governor, leading that state right now.
I was joking with Beth backstage when Cliff said, she lost. I'm like, no, I just didn't win. Because we don't know what really happened because of the miasma of voter suppression. I can't know for a fact that I would be the governor of Georgia but for the malfeasance and the mismanagement of Brian Kemp, but I know it's a pretty good guess. So I can't prove that I would have won, but I know we don't know because of how he behaved.
Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the person who won an adequate number of votes
but that's
to become the governor of
with all due respect, and I respect where you're coming from, and I respect the issues that you're raising, you're not answering the question. Do you think it was... You're not using the word legitimate. Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the legal governor of Georgia.
You see, I'm here to tell you that just because you win doesn't mean you're won.
You said to me that you did not lose, you just did not win.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that.
Bad news is that we didn't get the victory we secured. And the thing is, we will never know empirically that I got more votes because we will never know which votes didn't get counted.
This was not fair, it was not right, and it is deeply improper that someone could ascend to that role having performed so basely and so crassly against the very people he is now supposed to represent. The election was not fair, the process was not fair.
So you don't feel that you lost fair and square?
I do recognize I am not the governor of Georgia, but I do like to point out something that is true for me and for many in our state, and that is we won.
I'm not saying it's going to be legit. It's the increase in the prospect of being illegitimate is a direct proportion to us not being able to get these reforms passed.
Right-wing extremists already have a plan to literally steal the next presidential election.
It's not as if it's just Republicans who have monkeyed around with elections in the past. Sometimes Democrats have too. Whenever people are in power, they have this tendency to try to
tilt things in their direction.
Now, after watching that, if you still fail to recognize the evident selective prosecution driven by political motivations, then you are either severely uninformed or consciously betraying your country, thus making you complacent in the actions of the most corrupt political party in American history. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. It couldn't be clearer. The most corrupt political party ever is aggressively pursuing the prosecution of Donald Trump for alleged transgressions that they themselves have committed. I mean, the hypocrisy is glaring and motivation is evident. The perversion, not the pursuit of justice.
Virginia just stopped using touchscreen computer voting because it's so vulnerable. Right. We need to look at all the voting machines. Every Secretary of State needs to be, assisted in making sure that they are not being hacked and attacked.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling that.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risk.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors.
We know how vulnerable now our systems were. I know the hackathon that took place last year, where virtually every machine was broken into fairly quickly.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines, those that are being used in many states.
My view is they don't have to hack 50 states. In a close presidential election, they just need to hack one swing state, or maybe 1 or 2, or maybe just a few counties in one swing state.
How confident are you that the 2018 midterm elections are going to be legitimate?
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through. You have 21 states that were hacked into. They didn't find out about it for a year.
Right now, we have over a dozen states that either don't have any backup paper ballots or only have them partially. Do you think that our adversaries don't know what those states are? Of course they know what those states are. And if we have a close election, in the general election, in a presidential race, and one state's outstanding, and their ballot boxes gets hacked into, their elections get hacked into, we will have absolutely no backup.
I know America's voting machines are vulnerable because my colleagues and I have hacked them repeatedly. We've created attacks that can spread from machine to machine like a computer virus and silently change election outcomes. And in every single case, we've found ways for attackers to sabotage machines and to steal votes. Across the country, there are about 52 different models of machines. They fall into essentially 2 styles, ones that scan a piece of paper or ones where the voter just interacts with the touch screen. And many of them have been analyzed now by researchers looking for security vulnerabilities. In every single case where a U.S. voting machine has been analyzed by competent security researchers, they have found vulnerabilities that would let someone inject malicious software and change election data. Every single case.
The better or the more efficient way of hacking machines would be to subvert them all through the machine that's used to actually program those machines. So prior to each election, the county election office or the voting machine vendor will actually program memory cards for that election. It tells the machine who are the candidates, what are the the contests being decided, and that gets inserted into the voting machine. If you can subvert that machine that is used to program those memory cards, then you can pass rogue software to the voting machine.
Voting machines are not connected to the internet. This is something that you hear all the time in the US from election officials. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. And many new voting machines come with 4G wireless modems so that they can be connected to the internet from the polling place in order to upload the results faster. Now, to me, that sounds crazy. Why would you want to put your voting machines on the internet right in the middle of the election, potentially at the most vulnerable time?
Studies conducted in 2007 by the state of California, state of Ohio, state of Florida found security vulnerabilities that could take advantage of these to engineer viruses, where one compromised voting machine could then infect eventually the entire fleet of machines for an entire county. Typically at the end of the election day, you move a memory card through each of the machines in the precinct, and that's to collect the vote totals. That process can spread a virus. And there are other processes. The details vary from machine to machine.
When you say hacked, what were they able to do once they gained access to the machines?
Oh, all sorts of things. They could manipulate the outcome of the vote. They could manipulate the tally. They could delete the tally. And they could compromise the vote in any number of ways.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes as well as change the volume of data.
The machines used in Georgia have been demonstrated to be hackable through a virus that's carried on ballot definition cartridges, very much like the Stuxnet virus was inserted into nuclear centrifuges in Iran.
If the touchscreen prints out a ballot with the wrong votes, will the voter even notice? Well, we tested this in the laboratory a couple of years ago and asked more than 200 people to vote on machines we secretly hacked. 93% of them failed to spot that the ballots were different from what they voted for.
Our study shows that a criminal who can inject malicious software into this voting machine can control how the votes are tallied. His malicious software can steal votes, and it can cover its tracks so that the theft cannot be detected.
There are a number of states that outsource their reporting of elections to third parties, some of which are corporations based in other countries like Spain. So you've got to trust that the aggregation of the votes and the reporting of the votes is accurate as well.
I'm pretty sure my undergrad computer security class at Michigan could have changed the outcome of the 2016 Michigan election if we wanted to. It is that bad. And we have a combination of very powerful adversaries and unfortunately quite vulnerable and obsolete systems. That's why I say it's only a matter of time.
Unfortunately, in a lot of these systems, the audit trails are just as vulnerable as the other aspects of the system, so there may not be good forensic evidence of a successful intrusion. With the current design, we cannot be universally confident that it hasn't happened. And it's probably only a matter of time before it will.
Serious security experts right now just can't claim that our elections are quote unquote secure. That's not a soundbite we can give.
In at least 40 states, elections are carried out using machines that are at least a decade old, and like any technology, they're susceptible to increasing failure with age. Some state officials have had to turn to eBay to find critical components like dot matrix printers, decades-old storage devices, and analog modems. Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
It's not a misunderstanding or disinformation that our election systems are less secure than we need them to be. That's the consensus of the national academies.
Out of date campaign software is going to be used all over the country unless something is done about it. The agency in charge of protecting our election infrastructure against cyber threats has no idea how many vulnerable voting machines are out there right now. It is perfectly legal for the biggest voting machine company in America. And these voting machine companies basically think they are above the law. They wouldn't even answer basic questions when I asked them. And it is perfectly legal for the biggest one to sell a small county equipment that every cybersecurity expert in America knows is insecure. It is perfectly legal for a county clerk to put the outcome of a presidential election at risk by buying insecure machines.
In 2016, state election websites in Illinois and Arizona were hacked by intruders who installed malware and downloaded sensitive voter information.
Our focus here today is simply to tell the American people we acknowledge the threat. It is real, it is continuing, and we're doing everything we can to have a legitimate election that the American people can have trust in.
It is worth fighting for integrity in our election system, which means that they are free from interference by a hostile or an unfriendly nation. Let's put the resources into upgrading the state's elections systems. Because what we know is this: there are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Elections still seem to be, at least to me, perhaps the most neglected form of critical infrastructure in the United States. Many of the different kinds of voting machines, both the touch screens and the optical scanners that we use across this country, have been studied by security experts, though. And what we found hasn't been often very flattering. In every single case where there's been a public and rigorous independent security review, and the researchers have published what they found, researchers like me have found vulnerabilities that would enable forms of vote-out altering attacks. Does this pose a threat to election outcomes? Well, I would argue that it does.
I sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Homeland Security Committee. And we receive all kinds of information about the vulnerabilities to our national security. We are vulnerable in terms of foreign interference with our elections.
It's my understanding that some of the election system vendors have required states to sign agreements that prevent or inhibit independent security testing. There's a saying that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is the difference between being hacked and not being hacked is knowing you've been hacked.
And they are still looking for ways to steal information about voter registration, for example. There are some tax experts in Silicon Valley with whom I have met who say that maybe what they'll do this next time is to really disrupt the actual election. Shut down the servers that you send results to. Interfere with the operation of voting machines because still too many of them are linked to the internet. So we are still very vulnerable.
I mean, I can tell you in Virginia when I was governor, I had to replace all the machines because I remember when I first voted, when I went to Richmond, moved down as governor, I remember I kept voting in the Senate race, kept voting for the Democrat, Republican name kept coming up. 3 times that happened.
What do you mean kept coming up?
So, we had the touch screens. I was voting for Mark Warner, our senator. And Ed Gillespie's name would light up. Happened to me 3 times. Finally, the 4th time, Mark's name, and I quickly hit vote, and I got out of there. All the cameras are looking at me like, this guy doesn't know how to vote. I mean, what's going on? So then I had an investigation done, and listen to this. I brought in some technology experts. They were able to hack into our machines from off-site in about 5 or 6 minutes, and within 4 minutes, they were able to change a vote. I decertified all the machines. Now in Virginia, we have paper ballots.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors. These companies are accountable to no one. They won't answer basic questions about their cybersecurity practices, and the biggest companies won't answer any questions at all. 5 states have no paper trail, and that means there is no way to prove the numbers the voting machines put out are legitimate. So much for Cybersecurity 101. At least 44 million Americans, and perhaps millions more, have no choice but to use insecure voting machines that make hackers and hostile foreign governments salivate. It is, in my view, inexcusable that our democracy depends on such hackable voter technology made by a handful of companies that have been able to evade oversight and, in fact, have actually been stonewalling the Congress for years. The vast majority of 10,000 election jurisdictions nationwide use election management systems that run on old software that is soon going to be out of date and ripe for exploitation by hackers, according to an exhaustive analysis by the Associated Press. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Arizona, and North Carolina, among others, are all at risk, according to the Associated Press. Even the state of Georgia, which just passed legislation to buy new voting machines, is on track to buy equipment that suffers from this significant cybersecurity weakness. Let's say the election is decided by a small percentage, and people in America don't think that the election was fair. The effect that would have on our 200-year experiment in self-governance, our democratic system, would take a real hit. In the Intelligence Committee, both sides seem to agree that no votes were changed in the 2016 election. And I said, the experts I talked to say that until you have a forensic analysis of a vote, until you go in there and scrub the whole system, you can't really say that.
We've heard a lot from voting machine vendors and election officials that voting machines can't be hacked because they're not connected to the internet. All of those vulnerabilities that Andrew talked about are not a problem because no one can access the machines. And it turns out that that message that they've been giving us for years, and particularly after the 2016 election, just isn't true. Voting machine vendors have sold election officials on these in use of modems. In some cases, the modems are embedded inside the voting machines. In another case, they're external modems that get attached to the voting machine at the end of the election. So at the end of the election, the machine goes into shutdown mode, and then this option pops up about modeming results. And so the system will automatically then dial in and send these votes over a cellular modem to a server on the internet that collects the results. So everyone will tell you, and they've told me every time I've spoken with them, that cellular modems are not really internet connectivity. They will say, that doesn't mean that the machine is connected to the internet, it's using a cellular modem. Well, that's not true. And Election Systems and Software, which is the top voting machine maker in the country, this is one of their statements over and over again with the public. But this is one of their own diagrams that they actually gave to Rhode Island in 2015. And if you see that circular part in the center there showing that modem transmission using the wireless modem, they sit there, right there. It's on their own diagram that it's going over the internet.
Before every election officials have to program the voting machines with who's on the ballot and what are the rules for counting. Well, they make that election programming on a PC workstation somewhere, either at the jurisdiction or at an outside vendor that does it for them. If an attacker can break into that workstation, which is called an election management system, they can spread malicious code to all of the memory cards used to program all of the voting machines in the jurisdiction. And those election management system workstations sometimes are connected to the internet, or the data that's programmed into them passes through an internet-connected system. So we're just 1 or 2 hops away from an online attacker. So if I wanted to break into this company, let's say I was the attacker, I'd probably start by forging an email from, let's say, Larry, the president here, to Sue, his administrative assistant, asking her to urgently open an attachment. Now, of course, when she does, that attachment has my malware in it. I have a foothold into their network, and I can try to spread from there to the election management system and to the voting machines in most of the state. Tampering with the national election result in my country is easier than even I thought in 2016. I keep learning things that convince me that the situation is scarier than even experts had thought. You identify the states that are most weakly protected and going to be close, target the computers that are going to program voting machines there, spread malware to machines to change a fraction of the votes, and then rely on the fact that most states, even if they have a paper record, are not going to rigorously use it to check that the computers are right. But the fact is that in close national contests in the US, the result really only hinges on the result in a small number of states. You've heard about the swing states in any given election, the ones that are really competitive. In such a situation, an attacker can, before the election, identify which states are likely to be close. Try probing all of them in the way that the Russians did the voter registration systems in 2016, and just find the weakest swing states and attack there. So in this way, the American system converts diversity of implementation into basically this patchwork of strength and weakness that gives attackers a menu of possible places to strike. It makes us weaker in close elections.
Modems in voting machines are a bad idea. Those modems are network connections, and that leaves them vulnerable to hacking by anybody who can connect to that network. Once a hacker starts talking to the voting machine through the modem, they can hack the software in the voting machine and make it cheat in future elections.
The integrity of elections across the U.S. depends heavily on the integrity of computers and software systems that are embedded across our election infrastructure. Complex software lies at the heart not just of vote casting equipment used at polling places, but also the information systems used by local authorities to manage everything from voter registration records to the tallying and reporting of election results to the creation of ballots and so forth. Unfortunately, much of this infrastructure has proven dangerously vulnerable to tampering and attack, and in some cases in ways that cannot be easily detected or corrected after the fact. These vulnerabilities can create practical avenues for corrupt candidates or foreign adversaries to do everything from cause large-scale disruption on Election Day to potentially undetectably alter election outcomes in some cases. To be blunt, it's a widely recognized, really indisputable fact that every piece of computerized voting equipment in use at polling places today can be easily compromised in ways that have the potential to disrupt election operations, compromise firmware and software, potentially alter vote tallies in the absence of other safeguards. This is partly a consequence of historically poor design and implementation by equipment vendors, but it's ultimately a reflection of the nature of complex software. It's simply beyond the state of the art to build software systems that can reliably withstand targeted attack by a determined adversary in this kind of an environment. The vulnerabilities are real, they're serious, and absent a surprising and very fundamental breakthrough in my field, which I would welcome, but I don't see coming soon, probably inevitable.
Some jurisdictions are relying on uploading election results using cellular modems or the internet. That, of course, introduces another point of vulnerability, not just to the data that's flowing, but also to the software, the devices that are being connected.
Last year, journalist Kim Zetter in the New York Times reported that ES&S had installed remote access software and wireless modems in election equipment for years. I believe that's about the worst thing you can do in terms of election security in America, short of putting American ballot boxes on a Moscow street.
Many of these voting machines have modems embedded into them, and the modems are used at the end of the election to transmit the vote totals on election night to the county elections office. So these modems contact, they're cellular modems, and they contact the cellular network, they contact the cell tower. So the cell tower traffic these days in our modern times actually goes through internet. It goes through the same kinds of routers and switches that the regular internet traffic goes to. But also in between that cell tower and that voting machine, an intruder can intercept data going to the cell tower and intercept that communication, that phone call. If you can trick a voting machine into contacting your device, your fake cellular tower, instead of a legitimate tower, you can actually use that connection to get back into the voting machine and get back into the tabulator and then alter votes and software.
So just to review, you look at the polls before the election and figure out which states were likely to be close, probe all of them, find the ones with the weakest protection, then hack into the election management systems there or at the outside vendors the states use. Once you hack into the election management system, you can spread malicious code to individual voting machines and have your code say swap 10% of the votes in the places you infected. Then even if the votes are also recorded on a piece of paper, you don't have to worry, because in most of those states, they're going to just toss the paper out without looking at it.
Our elections weren't secure last week, and they sure as heck aren't secure this week. And anybody who says otherwise is either selling you voting machines or simply has a malicious intent towards our elections.
Now, you may be wondering about the disparity between the statements that you just heard from Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden, and Ted Lieu regarding electronic voting machines and the reporting done by FNC, OAN, and Newsmax. It appears there's some kind of a double standard at play, I would think, where those on the opposing side of the political spectrum are permitted to voice their concerns about election, integrity when it involves Donald Trump, while similar expressions are not allowed when the election pertains to Joe Biden. Now, these inconsistencies raise a lot of questions about fairness and impartiality in the public disclosure surrounding elections. These political opportunistic individuals rely on the hope that their statements will be conveniently forgotten or dismissed, right? In an attempt, I think, to conceal their true beliefs and the reality of what's transpiring. But fortunately, we have video evidence. It exists to counteract this, and it is reassuring that certain media outlets like OAN and Newsmax remain committed to delivering truthful information. And there are also citizens like you who stand united in supporting these outlets as they strive to uncover the truth and share this information. My name is Jazz McKay, the Deplorable Patriot. God bless America and death to the New World Order. Thanks for watching our deplorable video. And be sure to share it. Also, follow me on Twitter at DeplorableJazz, YouTube and Rumble at DeplorableJazzMcKay, and visit the website, TheDeplorablePatriot.com. Thanks again, and God bless America and death to the New World Order.